Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. We've got something really exciting to share today. Our Tula Pink HomeMade order is on its way to us. It should be arriving pretty early next week at our shop. And so if you pre-ordered the Cross Your Heart quilt kit, we're going to be getting those out to you later next week. And if you didn't pre-order your quilt kit or you want to get some Tula Pink pre-cuts, you can do that now. We've got orders available right now. We've reopened it up for the quilt kit and also for all the pre-cuts. We've got fat quarter bundles, we've got charm packs, and also some jelly rolls, and I believe some layer cakes as well. And then we can also get the Cross Your Heart quilt kit. We've got a limited supply of those left. So there's been so much buzz about this line. It is really a great tribute to quilting and sewing. It is a great line. It is really pretty, and if you are a quilter or sewer and you like Tula Pink, this is a must-have. Now, I got to get my hands on this early. I was asked by Free Spirit to design a pattern that used the line for when it debuted at Quilt Market last fall. So we're going to replay our video tutorial on Cross Your Heart, which is the pattern that I designed specifically to use this line. So you can use that, get some inspiration, and if you want, you can always order the pattern, or you can get the kit, or you can, get the pattern in the bundle and do your own thing with background fabric. Whatever you want to do, have some fun with it and really just enjoy this line. Now let's watch the video. All right, so I've already fussy cut out this machine. This is going to be the center of my block. I'm doing a combination of this and then also the rotary cutter print that I'm using for my centers. But we're gonna do a lot of half square triangles in this one. It kind of looks like flying geese when you put it together, but by doing half square triangles, we've got one size of piece to cut, and both for that inside and the outside, so it makes a little bit better use of the fabric, and that way you can get the most out of it when you are working with this. So the first thing I did is I drew a line from point to point on the wrong side of my solid piece of fabric. And if you're watching this at home, I basically have organized my block by colorway. So Tula came out with 3 different colorways and they coordinate with their solids. So if you get the pattern, we're gonna have that listed out for you so that way you know what kind of goes with what, if you wanna keep it the way we did it. Otherwise, feel free to mix and match and have some fun with that. All right, so once I've got this, I'm gonna arrange it. There's no right side because it's a solid, but with the line side up against the right side of my background fabric. Aren't those? They're scissors with a little eye in them. Aren't they fun? Very fun. So I'm gonna line that up perfectly with my corners matching right here. I'm not gonna pin this because I've probably done thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of half square triangles. But if you did want to pin, you would pin across the top and across the bottom. You don't want to pin out here because it's important to keep these points in line. And if you're pinned out here, then you could shift a little bit as you're sewing, and then your points will be in line and your squares won't turn out the right size. So it's important to just pin across the seam as you're going. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna sew a scant 1/4 inch seam down both sides of this line. So I'm gonna sew down that side and down this side. And you can chain piece these to make it a lot faster. I recommend that you do that. It will make your life a lot easier. I kind of did them by colorway. That way I felt like I was making some good progress there. And essentially you're just going to set your machine up for the scant 1/4 inch seam, which is just a regular 1/4 inch seam with the needle, 1 needle width to the right. It's very simple to do on your sewing machine. And then you're gonna line the edge of your presser foot up with this line as though it were the edge of your fabric. All right, so let's start sewing. All right, so I've got everything lined up so that this line is right even with the edge of my presser foot. I'm just gonna go ahead and sew that scant 1/4 inch seam. When I get toward the end like this, what I do is I just keep my finger to the right and in contact with that presser foot, and that allows me to maintain a really accurate seam all the way to the point. And sometimes when you do this, you'll end up with a smiley or frowny face, and it's because you didn't maintain that accurate seam all the way down, and you got a little wobbly at the end. But if you just hold your finger right there, that will help keep it stable all the way down. All right, so if I were chain piecing these, which is what I did when I was making the quilt, I would just lift it up here, slide the next one in, and sew along. But for the case of the video, what I'm just gonna do is pull my thread out a little bit, and I'm just going to sew down now the other side of that drawn line. Now you can see that we've got our seam about a scant quarter inch away, and the way you can check that is you can put your ruler right on top, and in this case we can see that it's just a hair inside that half-inch mark. So that means I sewed my scant quarter inch seam pretty well. If it is larger than a half-inch, then you're going to be in trouble. You're going to want to pick that and redo it. But as long as you're a half-inch or below, you are going to be good here with that quilt math. And now what I'm going to do is I'm lining that ruler right up on that line that I drew. I'm just going to slice across it. It's not super important that you are exactly on that line when you cut, because you already had the accuracy from sewing it, but you don't want it to be too close to one side or the other, because then your seam can pop open with use or when it's on the long arm. All right, so now when we open this up, we can see that we have 2 half square triangles, and basically 2 for the price of 1. This is hands down my favorite way to do half square triangles. 1, because I feel like I'm getting more accomplished, and 2, because this bias can stretch on you a little bit when you are sewing, and by sewing it while it is still attached to the other half of the square, you're gonna get less of that stretching, and so your half square triangles are much more likely to turn out the size you want them to be and have all your points going straight to those corners. I always like to press my seams open. To do that, what I do is I just open that up with my fingertip, and then I put the nose of the iron straight down the center of that seam, and I press it open with my 3 to 4 fingers ahead of that iron. Just make sure you don't burn yourself, don't move too fast. I just go straight down that. And you want to have a nice straight line like this. If you see any wiggles or bumps, that means that you pressed a pleat in and your triangle is not going to turn out the right size. So once I've got it done from one side, I usually like to just go at it from the other side as well. It helps it lay nice and flat. And the more I got into actually quilting my own quilts, the more I transferred to pressing my seams open like this. I do reduce my stitch length to 2.0 when I'm doing that, so that it's just a little bit smaller stitch, but it lays so flat when it puts together. You don't have those big lumps and bumps when you have all your points coming together, so it makes it easier to do that. And then you are really not limited at all in terms of your quilting choices, because you can get right into those points if you want to and really have some fun. All right, so we got to trim this down, and then we're ready to put our block together. So when you're trimming a half square triangle, there's a couple of places that you need to pay attention to make sure that you have all your points in the right spot. The biggest one is the 45-degree line on your ruler needs to be exactly on that seam line. If it is off like this, then your point isn't going to go to the corner of your block, and you will never be able to get it to do that. So that is the very first thing that I always line up whenever I am getting ready to trim a half square triangle. From there, I just make sure that I've got a little bit of fabric hanging off my top and my right side. I'm right-handed. If you were a lefty, it would be your left and your top side. And then pass the measurement that I need to trim to as well, so that way I've got something to trim down. Once I'm happy with where everything is, I just lay my hand down on top of it, and I'm just gonna real quick slice off. And just a quick note, whenever I do my math for these, you only have to add 7/8 of an inch to your finished size in order to get what you need. I always add a full inch because that gives you some wiggle room. I'd rather have a little bit more to trim off than not have enough and have too small of a triangle. All right, so once you flip that, you're gonna do a 180-degree flip. So now your cut side is on the left and on the bottom. And now I'm going to line up, again, that 45-degree line first. That is the most important line because it has to hit all the way to the corners with your triangles. And then the cut edge, I'm lining up exactly on the measurement I need to trim this to. And I'm gonna give it a trim up the side and the top again. And you can see we really did not trim that much off, but it looks so much better than before we trim it. We'll just do a little side-by-side comparison there. We have one that hasn't been trimmed yet and one that has. It is not that much smaller, just a little bit, but it is much neater. And so when you go to sew this together, one, this is going to fit exactly with all of your other ones because you're going to trim them down to size. So everything will fit together very nicely when you sew together your block. But also you won't have all this extra bulk of your dog ears. That's going to make it more difficult to get nice flat seams and really do whatever you want with quilting. I'm going to trim this guy up and then we're going to sew our quilt block together. So we're going to frame our quilt blocks up now, and I've already fussy cut off camera this sewing machine, and it looks really pretty. It looks a lot like Tula's Bernina sewing machines, and it is in 3 different colorways, and this one is just so cute. So I made sure that I had 1/4 inch seams above the cord there, and then I was able to get the majority of the foot pedal in that way. And then I kind of centered it so that we would be cutting off equal amounts of these flowers when you're looking at where your 1/4 inch seam falls. So maybe we'll do a separate video on how to fussy cut, but I didn't want to do it here because I didn't want to give away the measurement of what the center block is. So you have to get the pattern to get that. But just pay attention. It definitely takes more time to do it, but the results are so worth it to have this all framed up and beautiful. We also have these cute little prints that are nice little, they look like measuring tapes and grids, and they are actually to size, and they're really cute and really fun. I did the same thing when I cut those. What I did is I tried my best to cut them one side at a time. I didn't do, you know, fold over a fabric or anything, and I tried to really line it up so that way I would have nice straight lines, and so it would look straight when it's sewn together, because there's nothing worse than having something like this and then having it all cockeyed. So maybe we'll do a separate video on, you know, fussy cutting, and then making sure that when you have things like this that you are cutting with the print, because the print is often not printed straight on the straighter grain of fabric. So we'll do another video on that. You can watch that later, but this is really fun. What we're going to start doing is we're just going to sew these to the sides first using our 1/4 inch seam. So again, if you're working at home, you can absolutely chain piece these in order to make it work real fast. But what I'm just doing is I am lining my right side up here. And you can pin this if you want. They should be exactly the same size because we just cut them. It's not like we piece it together and there may have been some variance or anything. So I just line up my top and my bottom edges and sew all the way down. Just like when we sewed the half square triangles, I recommended putting your finger to the right of the sewing machine. This time I recommend putting it to the left, just right in contact with the presser foot, and that will help you maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down, so that way you have nice even seam allowances, because it really does matter because this is pretty skinny of a frame, so you definitely want to make sure that you've got your 1/4 inch down before you go on this project. Otherwise you might have some trouble getting everything to fit correctly. All right, so I'm just going to flip this guy upside down, and then I'm going to grab my other side piece, and I'm going to go ahead and arrange that and sew it right now. That way I can press these at once and make it more efficient. And again, if I were doing this for the actual quilt, I would do all of my centers from one colorway at one time, and then do this. That way it saves a little bit of time as you're going. I'm going to press these seams open as well. And again, I find that when you press it to one side, just the height of that fabric and the width of the thread, even if you use really thin thread, will reduce your size just a little bit. And so I want to really make sure that everything stays the exact size it should be. And pressing my seams open really helps out with that. And at this point, you should be able to tell really easily if you either had a problem cutting to the right size or sewing your 1/4 inch seam, because the width of this block should now equal the width of the strips that we're going to sew to the top and bottom of the block. If it's off, then something went wrong. So you're going to want to measure your centerpiece, your side pieces, and if those are on, then it means that your 1/4 inch seam might be off. So check that out. All right, so I'm just going to sew to the top and the bottom, then we're ready to put the outside of our block together. Just like before, I'm going to go ahead and sew the other piece to the other side, and then I'm going to press everything at the same time to save a little bit of time there. just like before, I'm gonna go ahead and press these seams open. The one difference is instead of just dragging the iron straight across is I'm lifting and pressing because I don't want to accidentally press any of the other seams that we already have pressed open the wrong way. All right, so we've got our Fussy cut sewing machine framed beautifully with our little measuring tape frame. And now we're gonna do some half square triangles, sewing those together in order to make our outside of our block. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna sew my half square triangles together to make what looks like a flying geese. So it's gonna look a little bit more complicated than it actually is. And I think it's a little bit easier because, you know, flying geese get a little wonky sometimes when you're working on them. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay these guys right sides together. And then what I do is I kind of look from the top and arrange those guys so that way my seams are right on top of each other. And you can really see this very easily when they're pressed open, as we've got green going to one side and that nice little orchid color going to the other. And then I put a pin in on whatever the bottom of my seam allowance is. So when I sew this, I'm going to sew down this side of the seam allowance so I can sew until my needle is fully down inside this seam allowance. Then I can pull my pin and that will hold those fabrics together really well and end up with a very nice join that looks a little bit like that. You can get these all pinned up ahead of time and so you're just ready to go and feed them through, or you can just pin them as you go. Whatever works best for you is totally fine. But again, I did these all as one colorway at a time and I paired up two of the same fabrics together so that way we kind of had that flying geese look to it. Now, if you have a presser foot that has one of those little guide things on the side, I recommend that you take that off and use one that doesn't have it for this step. I think it really works a lot better because here's why. I've got my needle down in that purple side of that seam allowance and I still have my pin in here, and that holds everything together and makes sure that we have those fabulous joins like we have right at the top one, and then I can remove my pin. If I had a foot that had a guide on it, those are great for some things, but not for stuff like this, because then it gets in the way of your pin and you're not able to get as accurate a piecing when you're putting all those points together. I'm gonna go ahead and put my finger to the left again to maintain that quarter inch seam all the way down. Then I'm gonna go ahead and repeat, and I just kind of like to pin as I go. I feel like it's just as fast for me, but you can do it however you want. One other really great triangle tip that I've seen people do is sometimes people like to use the start and stop button instead of the presser foot and when they're doing triangles. And I understand that that's convenient, but you are not able to control the speed of your machine when you do that. So when you're getting to things like teeny tiny little points where you might want to slow down a little bit, you can't do that. So I would recommend using your presser foot and not your start stop button whenever you're doing triangles. This here I want to slow down, stop with my needle down, and then guide my finger to keep that quarter inch seam perfect all the way through. And you just can't do that with that start stop button. So just like before, I'm gonna go ahead and take my fingers and open up that seam first. You might wanna finger press open that point because that's gonna be, take a little extra TLC. It's not hard, you just need to take a little extra time with it. And then this time I really lift and press because I do not want to flip any of those seams going the wrong direction, and it is easy to do because the shape of your iron is also the shape of that seam. All right, so once I'm good with that, I'm going to go ahead and flip it right sides together. We've got a great join here because we took the time to pin, and I'm going to go ahead and go actually across this way so I can hit all those seams and get them good and flat. All right, now that is super flat. There's no bump or lump or anything, and so it's gonna make for really great piecing when we put this block together. I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of mine, then we're ready to go. All right, so I've got my block all laid out, and you can really have a lot of fun mixing and matching these prints, either throughout the entire fat quarter bundle, or in this case, I'm sticking to a colorway because they all kind of play nice together. And it just is really fun, and my next block will look different than this because we'll have the fabrics in different combinations, and that'll be fun. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and sew this together in rows. So I'm gonna do a top row, a center row, and the side row. And I'm gonna give you some tips and tricks to make sure that we keep all those points exactly where they should be as we sew them together. So I'm gonna start with this top row. Now up here, we've got two triangles coming together, just like we had two triangles coming together there. So when I pin that, I'm gonna pin it the exact same way as I did before, where I'm just gonna flip these guys right sides together. I'm gonna line them up just like I did before, and I'm gonna put my pin in again on the bottom half of that seam allowance, which for this one happens to be right at the top of the block. So I'm gonna go ahead, when I sew this, I'm gonna sew a couple of stitches in, stop with my needle down, pull the pin, and then keep on going. Now for this one here, I'm just gonna flip this guy right sides together. Now, if you wanted, you certainly could pin this at the top and the bottom, and then also in the middle. But what I wanna make sure I do is there is a little tiny triangle formed by the inlet seam allowance there. So I want to be one needle width to the right of where that tiny triangle is when I'm sewing, and that will make sure that I don't lose any of those points. Now on the bottom, we're gonna do the same thing up here, and we're just gonna pin that guy together as well. All right, so I've got a few stitches in, I've got that needle down, and I can go ahead and pull this pin now because I know that my points are gonna stay where I want them to be. Now from here, I just kind of line up the bottoms, make sure that my corners are right on top of each other, and I just kind of hold my finger on top of that and let the feed dogs pull everything up. And then when I get to the end, again, I put my finger to the side so I can maintain that 1/4 inch stitch all the way down. Now for this one, again, you certainly could pin if you want. I'm not going to because I've done this a lot. But once you get to a point where you're comfortable with it, you can really take those liberties. But what I do is I always get it started, and then once my entire quilt block is on top of my extension table here, I'm just going to line up the corners there, and then I'm going to line up that and put a finger down, and I'm also going to make sure that my center is in line with my edge, and I'm going to kind of put a finger there too. Now I always slow down when I get to the center because I want to make sure that I'm sewing one needle width to the right of where that little triangle is in the seam allowance. So I got a good join. And we'll just sew the rest of the way down. And then we'll just chain piece in our last part of the row. Now, I am a huge proponent of laying everything back out in place to make sure that everything looks correct. It's a lot easier to fix a mistake at this step, say if you sewed one of these going the wrong direction, than it is later on. But what I'm gonna do once I've verified that we're looking good, and we are, I'm gonna go ahead and sew my last section over here to the center, and then I'm gonna press everything at once before we sew our rows together. We're gonna give everything a really good press, and it really isn't any different than anything we've been doing so far. It's just gonna be a lot of lifting and pressing those seams open. Now once I've got it flat from the back side, what I like to do is just lay it out flat here and make sure we're nice and flat from the front as well. And these seams are coming together just perfectly. Those points are just matching up wonderfully, and it's because we took the time to pin and we pressed those seams flat. This seam here can be a tad bit tricky, so make sure you really press that down with your fingertip first, just to get it nice and flat. Maybe spend a little extra time with it on your iron. This one, it's really important to press from the right side and to spend some extra time over that center. But oh my gosh, look at how good this is coming together. I mean, that point is right where it should be, and it's because we sewed just to the right of where that little seam was, so that way we didn't cut off that point. This is looking so cool. I love it so much, but we've got 2 more seams and then we are all done. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you how I line these guys up when we have straight seams, and then also how to pin on those diagonals. It's pretty similar to what we've been doing, but we'll just go over it. So we've got one more accurate step so you can make absolutely perfect blocks at home and show off how good your homemade skills are. All right, so we're just gonna flip these guys right sides together. And I typically start with these outside seams. So again, I like to look at it from above because since we press these seams open, it's pretty clear to see what's going in what direction. So you want those seams to be right on top of each other. And then I always pin in the right side of that seam allowance because that's the side we're gonna come to second. All right, so this part here, there is nothing to pin that to, but this is where, you know, we're just going to sew to the seam side of that. So when we're sewing, we're just going to be to the right side of where this tiny little triangle is, and that gets you your perfect joints every time. So I'm going to repeat and pin these guys together. Again, looking at it from the top to make sure everything is right where it should be. Now for this, it's really similar to where we were pinning it together when we were putting these guys together. You're just gonna look at it from the top and make sure that your seams are right on top of each other and that everything is going where it should be. And then you're gonna pin in the right side of that seam allowance. Go ahead and repeat on the other side. And now we've got our row ready to sew together. We're gonna start at the top and work our way down. All right, so just like when we were doing those half square triangles, I'm gonna sew a few stitches in just to get everything nice and secure. And with my needle down, that's when I'm gonna pull that first pin out. I kind of go a little faster until I get to that first seam allowance. And when my pin, or when my needle is down in the seam allowance, it kind of acts like a pin, then I can pull the other side. Now right here, I'm gonna go ahead and just adjust and make sure that my middle here is nice and in line with my edge of my piece below. And basically I slow down just a smidge whenever I'm coming to a place that matters, like those centers or also where anything's pinned. All right, stop with that needle down, put my finger to the side so we can maintain that nice quartering seam all the way down. Now I'm gonna wait to press everything until the end, but I'm gonna go ahead and pin my other row to my center, and then we'll press everything at the end. Just like all the seams in this quilt, we're gonna go ahead and press these open, and I'm gonna do a whole lot of lifting and pressing here because I do not wanna press any of those seams that we got perfect in the wrong direction. Now, before I press this from the right side, I'm gonna do one more thing. I like to use my little Misty sprayer. You can get this at hair salons, actually. It's meant for your hair. But what it does is you can put water, your favorite spray starch alternative in it, and it turns it into a fine mist, so that way you don't get like water droplets on it. And whenever I have this many triangles in a piece, I find it's always better to give it a little mist with either just plain water like I have here or a little bit of spray starch. And it just really helps everything lay super nice and flat and maintain the shape it's supposed to. Just pay particular attention to those areas where those points are coming in. And there we have it. We have a super cute, adorable block with our fussy cut center, and we can really have some fun mixing and matching what prints are gonna go there. You can make it look really scrappy, or you can make a bunch of them all the same. It's totally up to you. You can really have a lot of fun with this. We've got a lot of different blocks combos in here that we put together as we were putting it together. We'll show you some photos of the finished quilts, and the quilting on it turned out phenomenally. We love it. This negative space is really a gift you can give your quilter or yourself if you're the quilter, and you can have a lot of fun there playing with that negative space. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this Cross Your Heart tutorial. And again, if you want to do this quilt, you can pre-order the pattern or you can pre-order the kit with the pattern over at our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. The fabric and the pattern will be sent out in March of 2020 as soon as it arrives at our shop, and that pre-ordering is really the only way to guarantee that you're going to be able to get one. We'll order a little bit extra, but you know, if you really need this quilt in your life, you got to pre-order it. And the deadline for that is going to be in the video description down below. They actually haven't released that at the time that I'm filming, so it's going to be a little vague on it, but it's super cute. I really love working with this collection. It's so bright and cheery and just celebrates all things handmade, and that's what we love as quilters. And if you ever love Tula Pink or you'd like to help support us because you enjoy our videos, a great way to do that is by getting the patterns and the supplies from us whenever you find something you want to do. And this kit is going to be exclusive to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. No one else is going to have it, so if you want it, you got to get it from us. So links to everything you need are going to be in the video description down below. And until next week, happy quilting.